Paul O'Sullivan of Forensics for Justice joins us now. And, an unusual place to start for us, Paul. An article that you wrote about being on the re-inaugural, I suppose you could call it, flight to Cape Town at South African Airways. You're a huge supporter of SAA, and you must have felt something special to decide to actually write that piece. What struck me was the spontaneous applause that appeared to come from other passengers and presumably including yourself.
Well, I was holding my phone, so I was actually videotaping with my phone both the takeoff and the landing. Those that know me know that I'm an aviation enthusiast. I have my own plane and I do a lot of flying. So I was actually videotaping for my own use, if you like, the takeoff. And as the plane rotated and we went into the air, everybody on board started cheering and clapping. And the same happened when we landed. And it was reminiscent of being back in Russia on a domestic flight, because the domestic flights in Russia, the people all cheer when it lands, I suppose that goes back to the old days when the hostess would say, well, if you stay in your seats while the captain taxis what's left of the aircraft to the terminal building. But it's less common now than it used to be because a lot more people are flying in Russia. But if I go back 10, 15 years, if you were on a flight internally in Russia, people used to cheer when the plane landed.
It was extraordinary how well that piece of yours was received by the business community. Tens of thousands of people reading it, and interesting debate around it. Some people saying, well, O'Sullivan would say that he's a platinum card holder, whereas other people are saying, good for you, Paul. I'm so pleased that we've got SAA back in the air, and the country needs a national airline.
I think, there's always going to be people that are negative. There's not much you can do about them. The people that are prepared to be negative about everything in life, I just stay away from people like that because they want to make you negative. And I'm a positive person, and I always believe that if there's something wrong, something can be done about it. And if you're one of these people that believes that if something's wrong, nothing can be done about it, then you'll never get on in life. So I always believe that something can be done about corruption. Something can be done about crime. The only thing you can't do anything about, if you're living in the UK, for example, is the weather. But in South Africa, we have great weather. So we have great people in this country. 99% of the people in this country are good, decent people. And there's a great camaraderie with, all between the races. Of course, there's little splinter groups that want to be racist. There are black and white people that want to be racist. But for the most of the people in the country, they want to get on together, and they recognize that we're all in the same boat, and we must all row together. And if it's bailing out water, we must bail out the water together. And I think that's what's unique about South Africa. There's so much apathy. If I look at what's going on in Europe at the moment, there's total apathy. People just don't give a damn. And if you fall down in the street in London, people will actually walk over you. They'll step over you rather than help you. And I think in South Africa, people tend to be, there's a lot more oneness, even though that, sometimes the media do latch on to these very rare examples where people, I think there's a famous estate agent who got carried away, and there was another lady who took it out on the traffic cop. But for the most part, the people in this country are trying to work together and make the country a good country. Now, it's very easy to write off an airline. If you apply the same mentality to those that say, I'll never fly on the airline again. Why? Because it was corrupt, because it was in the hands of corrupt people. If you apply that same mentality, you must stop buying your electricity from Eskom. And you better not drive your road on a road that's been put there by the National Road Agency, because there's corruption there. And why on earth would you get on a train that was being run by what was a corrupt Prasa? And you better not eat any of the goods that arrive at your house because they've come in through our ports, and the ports were run by a corrupt Transnet. So where does it stop? Oh, by the way, if you switch on your tap and you live in somewhere like Umfeleni or Durban or many of these areas where the water boards were corrupt, should you drink that water now that they're no longer corrupt, or should you get your own water? And I'm a great believer in understanding the big picture. South African Airways is not just a state-owned airline; it's also a flag carrier. If we turn back the clock a few years, I remember once I was in London, and I was near Heathrow, and we were doing some work on a landing system. We were looking at a new landing system that had been developed, and I was with some consultants looking at this right off the end of the runway at Heathrow, and we've got our air defenders on. And coincidentally, on that morning, 5 South African Airways flights came in one after another in a period of about 20 minutes. And there were 3 from Johannesburg and 2 from Cape Town. And I what a tremendous thing to see 5 planes one after another. I think there was interspaced about 4 or 5 other planes with them. So it wasn't as if they were all lined up at the same time, but they were all within a 15 or 20 minute period. 5 South African Airways planes landed there. And that was the peak of South African Airways. They were making money then. Why can't they go back to making money? Why can't they go back to carrying the flag overseas and helping to promote South Africa as a tourist destination and getting more jobs going again, and the billions of rand that need to be brought into the country with foreign direct investment and tourists? So I'm a great believer in that, and I'm also a great believer in not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Now, if somebody that's corrupt or dishonest has had hold of and ruined an entity which has got enormous values of investment in it, you just go out to OR Tambo Airport and look at the hangars. They're all standing empty now. All these hangars are owned by South African Airways. When AXA was privatized, it was all owned at one stage. It was all owned by the Department of Transport. Now, if you go back 30 years or perhaps more now, because I think AXA became into being in 87 or 88 or early 90s, maybe it was 94, I can't remember. But before that, everything was owned by the Department of Transport, the Ministry of Transport. They owned the railways, they owned the docks, they owned the airports, and they owned the national airline. Now, over a period of time and with democratization, it's been unbundled. But what we have is a national airline with massive infrastructure that would just be laying unused. Now, there's capital cost involved in all that. You can't sell or rent out all those hangars to the competitors or the current competitors or the replacements of the SAA routes. It's nice to see dynamic free market activity in the airline industry. But at the end of the day, it's also nice to see a flag carrier. And it's my understanding that if the government had have liquidated the airline, there would have been debts called in, and they would have had to pay. The knock-on effect from those debts would have been to devalue the rand even further, and it would have resulted in a massive borrowing cost for South Africa. So the economics of it, you have to look at the big picture. You can't just look at this thing, Dudu Mayeni ruined that airline, so I'm not flying it again. And then I heard racist comments about pilots. Some people saying, they won't fly a plane because they're black pilot. If you've qualified and you've got your pilot's license, doesn't matter what your skin color is. If you're qualified to fly, you're qualified to fly.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you make on many levels. But now with the private sector coming in, and we haven't heard the results of the due diligence yet, but if that were to happen, you might have the best of both worlds. Private sector operated 51% controlled airline that remains the the national carrier or the flag bearer in the international community. But Paul, just moving on to another piece of very good news is the Digital Vibes story that is now reaching a conclusion. You unpacked it for us very well a little while ago. Have you been following the latest developments there?
Yeah, well, obviously, I got the SIU report. Um, the president released it, I think it was last week. It was quite interesting. I've just got the executive summary sitting here in front of me. So if I cast down my eyes, you'll understand what I'm looking at. So they said there was 150 million rand of fruitless and wasteful expenditure, of which between 72 and 80 million was incurred by the National Department of Health. So that's quite a significant amount of money. They could have built a nice hospital somewhere for that same amount of money. And yet the preservation orders that they've obtained, they've only managed to secure 22 million. So one has to assume that the rest of the money has, it's been spent at car dealerships or whatever. An investigation needs to unpack that and get some more of that money back. I think 22 million out of 150 million is a very low return. What they have done, they've made it clear, which I think we've known all along, is that Mather and Mitha committed fraud, because this whole Digital Vibes thing was nothing more or less than a front for them. And they had their dear friend, who must be probably not their friend anymore and probably having her own lawyer separate to them. And that would be Miss Harry Ram, the petrol station manager, who suddenly woke up to find that she was the owner of a company with 150 million rand in turnover. Now, of course, she had no knowledge of what was going on in the company at all. And there's a warning signal there to like-minded Miss Harry Rams, and that is, don't allow somebody to set up a company in your name and run that company and pay you something for the trouble, because you're allowing them to use you as a front. And that's criminal. It's money laundering. And that's what they've been up to. So, and I think the report recognizes that there needs to be criminal charges against a number of individuals, including Matha, Mitha, Hariram, the Director General, and various other persons. And they talk about the gratifications received directly and indirectly by the minister himself. And it seems his son was the biggest beneficiary. Now, the son would be an extension of himself. So it doesn't really matter whether the bribes are paid directly to you or to your son. They're bribes, no matter what they are. And I think that needs to be unpacked. And I've got no doubt that as we're looking at this now, the investigative directorate are probably also looking at it. And I think it's only a matter of time now before the DPCI effects some arrests in this regard.
What about the minister, Paul? What about Zweli Mkhize himself? Is he likely to be arrested?
I think so. I think so. And the reason I say that is it really doesn't matter whether I receive the cash payments myself or whether they've been received by my son. And in this case, they were received by family members of his. So, does it matter if you get the money or your wife or son gets the money? You're still getting money, and it's an unlawful gratification, which is corruption in terms of Section 3 of Act 12 of 2004. So the act is very clear, and it doesn't really matter whether you receive it or somebody else receives it on your behalf. Now, it'd be like me doing a favor, and the gratification is to get a job for my son. I've not benefited. It's my son that benefits. Well, indirectly, I've benefited because I've arranged a job for him. So it's corruption, in my opinion. And in my opinion, he should be criminally charged. And it's a sad indictment.
Why has the president not moved against him yet? What is going through his mind, do you think?
Well, I think he's no longer the Minister of Health, is he?
No, he's no longer the Minister of Health.
And I think probably with this report now, I imagine that there'll be a disciplinary committee or whatever, the internal process of the ANC will be set up, and they'll have to do some explaining. I mean, the direct gratification, if you want to call it that, amounts to only 6,720 Rand. It's still a gratification. It's still a bribe. It's still an unlawful gratification. And there can be no doubt about that. And the cash paid to the minister's son of at least 160,000 Rand, plus a car for 300,000 Rand cash transferred to the minister's son, 160,000 Rand for a second-hand Toyota Land Cruiser, and vast amounts of cash that were transferred out of the bank and paid to the minister's son, which they don't have a proper record, because, as you know, when you draw cash from the bank and you carry it in a bag and hand it to people, it's very hard to follow the audit trail. And I mean, the minister lied to the country. On the 26th of May this year, he had a press conference and he made it crystal clear that neither he nor any of his family received any benefits of whatsoever nature as a result of this digital vibes thing. And of course, he was lying. Now,
why would he do that, Paul? Because surely he would know that it's going to come out in the wash.
Well, why did Radovan Krejcir deny being involved in organized crime? Why did Jackie Celebi deny? He waved his hands and he said, look, these hands are clean. They can come and look at my bank statements. They won't find anything wrong. Criminals deny committing crime. When the day comes where they automatically confess to committing crime, the minute they're challenged on it, it'll be a great day for the world, but it's never going to happen, because they'll deny until they're actually put in the dock. And then when they're sentenced, they'll say, oh, I've been sent to prison for not doing anything wrong,
But how do you know that they are not telling the truth? How does someone like you, who relies on interviewing people, know that the person on the other side that you are interviewing is actually lying to you? Or maybe even in Zweli Mkhizi's case, if you were watching the television, would you have had any inkling that he wasn't telling the truth?
Well, firstly, I didn't watch him on the TV, but many, many years ago now, I'm a certified voice stress analyst, computer-aided voice stress analyst. I've got a machine, which is a computer, and you monitor the voice, and you can pick up the telltale signs on the voice waves on your computer screen. And I qualified, I think, 30 years ago. And I have to be honest with you, although I've got the machine, I used it for the first few weeks, and I'd open it up. And then what I realized was some people, and I'm one of them, I have this natural ability while I'm looking at them to see whether they're lying or not. And I used to, going back a few years, I used to lecture. We used to call it truth-seeking interviews. I used to lecture on the subject of truth-seeking interviews. Other people might call it interrogation. But I call it truth-seeking interviews, where I sit people down and we have a discussion, and I jokingly refer to it as giving them a slap in the face. And that is where we call it norming. You get them into a comfort zone and you normalize their behavior, and you talk about things which for them are normal, and you watch their conduct, and you watch their body language, and you memorize it to a degree. And then you'll ask them questions that they have to think about, and you watch what they do while they're thinking about it. And then you reach a point where you give them what I call the slap in the face by saying, okay, so let's now talk about the money you stole from your employer. And that's when you see their body language go into another gear altogether. So there are ways and means. I remember many, many years ago, the US president, a chap by the name of Bill Clinton, and there was a young intern working in his office by the name of Monica Lewinsky. And I remember at the time when that was going on, this whole Lewinsky-Clinton debate was going on, I was lecturing in the subject of, training people on how to watch body language and how to learn body language and how to apply those skills when interviewing people. And fortunately, I had a VCR, a video cassette recorder, and I wanted to watch the news that evening, and I had recorded it. We didn't have the technology that we have today. I put the video cassette recorder in and I set the timer for the news because I knew I'd be out. And there was a particular item on the news that I wanted to get, which had nothing to do with Bill Clinton. But when I came back, I put on the VCR and I watched the news. And lo and behold, there's Bill Clinton. And I mean, his giveaway body language was a cracker. So I actually took that videotape and I used it for 2 or 3 years in my lectures to show people what a liar looks like when they're giving an interview. And Jackie Celebi was the same. Jackie Celebi couldn't look at the camera. He looked up into the sky. He said, look at my hands. These are clean hands. These are not the hands of a dirty cop. And he says they don't need warrants. I'll hand over my bank statements tomorrow. They won't find any money in my bank at all. And I'm watching all this on TV. And his sidekick, Andre Price, had invited me to come along to this press conference where they were going to out me as a foreign spy and accuse me of trying to destabilize the South African police. And of course, I didn't go. I watched it on TV instead, and I recorded it. And his body language was a cracker. And when he said, they don't need warrants, I'll give them my bank statements, they won't find any money that's come into that made me realize, we shouldn't be looking at the money that came into his account. We should be looking at the money that didn't go out of his account. And the reality of it is that when he received the bribes from Glenn Agliotti for a 3-month period, neither him nor his wife drew out a single rand from an ATM or spent a single rand on their credit cards. So we were left wondering, how did they buy their bread and milk on a daily basis, And so he actually gave the game away with his own lies. And quite often they do that.
Be interesting to see whether the SIU has a look at William Keyes's family's bank accounts, because the millions that were apparently picked up from that Stanger service station in black plastic bags had to go somewhere. Just to close off with, Paul, there is Kuben Moodley, a Gupta-fixer, who has now been let out on bail. Without going into the details of this, if someone is a flight risk, and we know that the Guptas are sitting pretty in Dubai, is it smart to let them out of jail on bail?
Well, the constitution in South Africa, there's a presumption of innocence until proven guilty. And there's a burden on the state, unless it's a Schedule 6 offense or, even murder. People get let out on bail for murder. So on the serious offenses, there's a presumption of innocence, in fact, of any offense, unless proven guilty. Now, the state would have to show that it's the interest of justice not to grant the person bail. And unless they can prove that, then the person is entitled to bail. And that's it, short and sweet. Ironically, I had these dirty cops that they didn't try, they did arrest me. They dragged me off a plane and locked me up because I used my Irish passport once or twice. I used it once to come in and once to go out. And because I used my Irish passport to come in and out of the country, which is a non-offense, nobody's ever been charged for it except me. I made history there. It's a statutory offense which is ignored. And yet they wanted to oppose bail. They said they wanted to charge me with treason and espionage and God knows what else. And they wanted to oppose bail. I I guess bail is you're automatically entitled to bail unless it's your Schedule 6 offence. And then the burden is on you as the accused to show that special circumstances prevail why you should get bail. So other than that, you're kind of more or less guaranteed bail.